All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are getting close to the end of our first day. I want to invite you back in. Find your seats. And as you make your way back into the room, we've got a few more trivia questions to find out how well this room knows our 20-county region. So get out your cell phones. Log back in. You may need to send that text again, Innovia F237, and text it to the number 22333. And our first question before we start back up for our final session of the day: which American icon was married in Lewiston, Idaho? And no, it was not Ludacris. Which American icon was married in Lewiston, Idaho? Oh, this one's a little closer. Bing Crosby with a slight lead. Oh, Walt Disney has taken the lead. Almost 52% for Walt Disney. Yes, and the correct answer is Walt and Lillian Disney. Lillian first met Walt while working at Disney's studio in 1923, but she was born in Spalding, Idaho. She grew up in Lapway on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation. The couple were married at Lillian's brother's home in Lewiston, and get this, she is credited with her husband's most famous character, Mickey Mouse, which she came up with during a train trip from New York to California in 1928. Isn't that great? Married right there in Lewiston, Idaho. Next question. Which extreme sport is hosted in Riggins, Idaho every year? Submit your answers, and the correct answer is, last call for final votes. That's right, jet boat races, hosted annually on the third weekend in April on the Salmon River, Idaho's whitewater capital, also ominously nicknamed the River of No Return. That's a real thing. This is the longest running river jet boat race in the USA, and host town, Riggins, Idaho, is home to about 413 people on most days, but during the Salmon River jet races, that population quadruples it increases fivefold. So that's a big event. Last question for this session. Which of these professional athletes was not born and raised in Spokane? Was it Ryne Sandberg, longtime center fielder, Chicago Cubs; Amanda Fuhrer, American rifle shooter; Cal Ripken Jr., record-holding baseball player for the Orioles; or John Stockton, Gonzaga basketball alumnus, former point guard, Utah Jazz? Looks like we got a consensus, and the correct answer is, that's right, Cal Ripken was not born and raised in Spokane. All three of these were. And what a group of stars. Amanda Fuhrer is an American rifle shooter. She's a Meade High School graduate, go Panthers, who competes in the 50-meter rifle three-positions event, and had already set junior national shooting records, and she'd won a medal in the Pan Am Games, and had competed in Australia, Germany, Korea, Italy, and the Czech Republic by the time she graduated from Meade High School. That's impressive. John Stockton, of course, retired NBA star, former Gonzaga standout, born and raised in Spokane, and after Gonzaga spent his entire NBA career with the Utah Jazz, led the Jazz to the NBA playoffs in each of his 19 seasons, holds the NBA record for most career assists and steals by wide margins, regarded by many as the greatest point guard of all time. And of course, Ryne Sandberg, longtime second baseman for the Chicago Cubs, made 10 appearances in the All-Star game and won 9 consecutive Golden Gloves. Born and raised in Spokane, went to North Central High School and graduated in 1978. Isn't that fun? You now know a few more things, fun facts and interesting things. Don't we live in an incredible region with so many great people, so many beautiful places, so many interesting ways that people who love this region and live in this region are investing to make a difference and make this a place that's vibrant and sustainable for generations to come. And we're very proud to have all of you here today and to be a part of that. And as we bring up our next speaker, I want to share with you another video that tells this story of what happens when passionate and innovative and creative thinking people come together to make a difference for their community. Would you turn your attention to the screens?
Kind of little, Norman Rockwell-esque type of idyllic community.
You don't have to worry about your children being out on the street.
The people are so friendly. I think that's the best reason for living in a small town.
Generosity is not rare in this town. You see it daily.
People are amazing. They'll chip in money, they'll chip in their time, their labor.
Hardly a day goes by without a news report or article about rural communities struggling across America. From child poverty to shuttered downtown buildings, limited access to quality health care, or young people leaving their hometowns never to return, life in small towns can sometimes feel hopeless. But not in Harrington, Washington. Harrington is a community where passionate leaders and engaged citizens have come together to ignite generosity to ensure that their community is vibrant and sustainable. Inovia Foundation has been privileged to be a part of that story of generosity. First through a grant in 2007 that enhanced the project to renovate and restore the historic Opera House, and today through a $30,000 challenge grant to ignite the generosity for the community around a town square in the heart of Harrington.
The Town Square project is going to be a big deal for our town, and when it's completed, we're going to have a really great spot for people to stop and enjoy our community even more than they can now.
It's going to make downtown look a little bit more complete.
And they're going to have a little gazebo in there and trees and grass. Perfect place for people just to stop and visit.
I'm absolutely amazed that Inovia has come through and provided a grant to help us spark the restoration of that lot, build a town square.
It's basically doubling our own money. So if we put down the money, it's going to be matched by Inovia, and so we couldn't ask for anything more.
There's so many people working on the lot before the funds have even been matched because they're inspired and they want to be a part of it and they want to see it grow. And it just gives us the opportunity to do something that we would in no other way be able to do.
I hope what we're doing sparks entrepreneurs and people that live here, maybe people that want to move here. I want to see people come here and, love this place. It's a great place to be.
My biggest hope is to have a reason for the graduating seniors to want to come back to our community.
That video is inspiring to us because it tells the story of a community of people who have come together inspired by that matching challenge to do so much more for their community. And for the residents of Harrington, Washington, 2 of whom are here in this room today, and I'll give them a shout out in just a second. The vision of a town center is more than just a project to make their town look prettier. Really, the heartbeat of it was, how do we do something to continue the momentum and the incredible growth and revitalization that's already been taking place, and to further that, to make this a place, as that last woman spoke of, that would be the kind of community where young people could leave and want to come back and bring their families back, and that matters to all of us. And we shared this video at Inovia's annual reception back in October, and at that time the community of Harrington was right in the middle of their matching gift challenge. Today I'm so pleased to share that they have raised over $47,000, meeting and exceeding that $30,000 matching grant from Inovia. Congratulations. And Timothy Tipton and Heather Slack are here from our Adams and Lincoln County Regional Council. Congratulations to both of you for all the leadership and hard work. Way to go. Our theme for the Leadership Summit, which you've now heard spoken so many times today, it's really anchored in Innovia's vision. A vision of vibrant and sustainable communities across Eastern Washington and North Idaho, where every person has the opportunity to thrive. And our next speaker shares the same passion for vibrant and sustainable communities. Mary Doyle is the founder of Rural on Purpose, a growing movement of people who are passionate about building a blueprint for rural health and prosperity. With over 28 years of experience working in all three sectors, private, nonprofit, and government, Mary works to improve economic opportunities for people living in rural areas by piloting high-impact programs that prepare them for the future. So would you please join me in welcoming Mary to the stage as she inspires us with her work to better understand the ways that urban and rural communities can work together so that both can flourish and prosper. Mary Doyle.
Just getting set up quickly here. I really want to first of all thank Aaron and Shelley and Paul for bringing me here and giving me an opportunity to meet brilliant, absolutely brilliant, kind people. And that's the only people that I've met here so far. And you're really a community worth serving. And I feel very fortunate to be here. And that video kind of got me choked up. So great work that you're doing. I just have to make sure that I stay on time. Sorry guys, just one second. I think it is, yeah. Yep, I'm just trying to make sure that I get there we go. We're all good. Okay, for the next hour, keep it over here. For the next hour, what I'd like to do is share a little bit about me. I want to talk a little bit about you for about 20 minutes, and then I want to start right into talking about the rural-urban divide and why it matters and what we can do about it. And then we'll wrap up. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Okay, so I grew up rural. I grew up teeny, tiny rural in the 1970s and 80s. The town was about 250 people, and I actually lived in the outskirts of that town, so very rural. I had one friend within biking distance. At that time, most phone calls were long distance. Television was limited to maybe 2 or 3 channels. That was it. I had a 40-minute bus ride to school. We had a hobby farm at the time. So we had our own cows and chickens and turkeys and pigs, and we had a huge root cellar and a huge garden. We tapped trees in the springtime, made our own maple syrup. We had a wood-burning furnace. What else can I tell you? My swimming lessons were in a lake, and I went to school to the same school from kindergarten to grade 13, and we had grade 13 at that time in Ontario. So all in the same school. So I can pretty much out-rural anybody. And I know someone's going to challenge me here. So I like to think that I grew up the way a lot of rural kids do. my life when I was a child was like a safe bubble. That's the way I would describe it. It was safe, and it was comfortable, and it was happy. And then I was a teenager in the 70s and 80s with very, very little opportunity to spend time socializing, and you feel disconnected. And I was a teenager, and so I described this time as being like a cage for me when I was in rural, because I wanted to get out. I wanted to spread my wings. I wanted to try things. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to do things. And I think that a lot of our young people feel the same way, and that's natural. And now I'm 51 years old, and I went from my life as being a bubble to being a cage to being a calling. And if you had told me when I was 17 years old that I would be a rural advocate, standing in front of people talking about how important it is that we work to develop our rural communities, I would have told you were crazy. I made the mistake actually with an entirely urban audience in Toronto. I put up a slide when I was trying to describe this, and I had a slide of me when I was a teenager, and I said that I was rural against my will at that time. And it's because it was a play on words, because I have Rural on Purpose as my business. And I looked around the room, I realized I made a terrible mistake, because everyone's eyes got really big and their hands went up to their mouth, and I realized very quickly that they really thought they were about to hear a presentation about a young girl who was kidnapped and forced to live in the woods and now identifies with her captors and has Stockholm Syndrome. So I don't use that slide anymore, and thank you for laughing, because it was a big mix-up. It took a while to get through that presentation. Okay, so to punish me for my contempt of authority as a teenager, fate made me an authority myself. And I am a Gen Xer. We've had lots of talk about different generations throughout the day today. And I'm Gen X, and so of course I have to have a manifesto. That's just part of who we are. But my whole goal was to try and find a way to have an elevated conversation around what it means to be rural today, because really we struggle with that. We have so many people that are, and so many news articles that constantly bombarding us with this negative messaging about what it means to be rural, that you start to believe it yourself when you're living in those communities. So I created a manifesto, and I'm going to read it. We are fearlessly optimistic people living in rural communities. We believe that entrepreneurship is a vehicle for change and a mindset of growth. We don't fear the future, we have faith in it. Constraints are simply catalysts for innovation. Today, we have the opportunity to transform, augment, innovate, and connect like never before in history. We are changing the course of rural communities with our own wit, wisdom, and ingenuity. We are living rural on purpose. And when I made that, I wrote those words, and I found somebody to make it pretty for me. I didn't realize it was going to connect with so many people when I put it out there. And I have people that connect with me about this manifesto from all over the world. Rural communities are struggling with the exact same issues in Australia, in Ireland, in Spain, in Mexico, in all over the U.S., all over Canada, and we are all searching for that way to have an elevated conversation and a positive one. So that's where I'm trying to go with this. When I was coming here, I wanted to get a couple of T-shirts printed, and I thought it made more sense for me to try and reach out to somebody that was a local printer here. So I did. I found a local printer online. Post Falls, in Post Falls, if there's anybody from there. And so I sent the information out, and I thought I was talking to I thought it was a bot asking me for all of the information when I was putting my order in. And then all of a sudden, what I thought was a bot wrote to me and said, I love your manifesto, and I've gone to your website, and I feel exactly the same way, and I really want to talk to you about this. And this is a person, okay? So we had this great conversation. This was a few days ago. And this printer and his wife reached out to me and they said, can we take you out for a coffee when you get here? So we spent a good 2 hours in the lobby of the hotel the other day just talking about their business and their dreams and their plans and their vision, and it was wonderful. And it's an example of what the people here are like. You guys are doing some pretty amazing work and serving some pretty amazing people. So what is it that we all want? We want quality of life, and it's not easy, and we need help. And that's where you come in. This brings me to what you're doing with your leadership work. When I started doing some more research into what Inovia Foundation is doing, it was exactly what I'm trying to do with Rural on Purpose. So, you to date, we're talking about your impact. We're looking at civic engagement, education, youth development, arts and culture, economic opportunity, health and well-being, and quality of life. So that's pretty inspiring. That's what I call boots on the ground community building, and you're embracing that fearless optimism that I think is so important if you're going to be doing this work. And I thank you for it, because we need so many communities of people doing this work. I am going to apologize ahead of time, partly because I'm Canadian, but partly because I am a Gen Xer, and sometimes I can't help myself with some of the slides. When I learned that the Inovia Foundation was formed in 1974, I realized that it made you the original community champions. So thank you for letting me make that slide. Okay. So life is really simple, but we insist on making it complicated. I don't know if any of you have seen this. I know Paul has passed this infographic that I made around, but my entire community building strategy is really simple. And I believe that if you get to know a community, show that you care about them, and you create things with them, then that's it. That's the magic. That's all there is. And it's no different from raising a family. You do the exact same things with your family that you do with your community when you're trying to build it. You get to know them. So you get to know your communities. You find out who already exists in your communities. You see them from their own perspective, and you validate that. And don't make any assumptions. And we do that with our teenagers and with our kids, our young kids, all the time. Show that you care about them by being engaged with them and giving them your attention and being on their side. And when you do that, then you have people that want to work with you. And then the very last thing is the create part. That's when we do memorable things together and we celebrate milestones. And we're doing that really, really well. And that's evidenced here with all of your videos and all of your presenters so far. But what I want to say is, when we're looking at this really simple model of community building, know, care, create, we have to be really careful that we don't skip those first two pieces. And we tend to think we're doing it all really well. But if we jump right to the celebrate milestones, and we don't put the effort into getting to know people and spending the time with them when it doesn't matter, when there's no agenda, then you're not going to have that same kind of buy-in, especially when you're talking about young people. With any kind of youth engagement, you have to put the time in. That's the most important thing. And I liken it to taking that family photo at a holiday dinner table, but not having dinners together the rest of the time. It doesn't mean a lot. So we all need to spend as much time as we can really assessing how we're spending that time getting to know and showing that we care about the people in our communities. And it's just a small adjustment most times, but I think that we can all work on that. So how many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy? Okay. Great, perfect. It's a theory of human motivation with 5 stages of human growth that reflect universal needs as a society. And the idea is that we have to satisfy each of those needs, each stage, before we are motivated to move on to the next one. I like to look at this whenever I'm doing any kind of community building work or working with anyone who's doing any kind of planning or looking at initiatives in their community, because we have people working at every single one of those levels, living in every single one of those levels in our community. And we have a lot of initiatives that we're working on. But if we can try and pinpoint it and better balance that out in our community to make sure that we're covering all of those different levels and helping people raise that level, individuals in your community raise that level, whatever it is, wherever they are on that chart, then you're going to be making a difference. So the first one is basic requirements for survival. So that's our physiological needs, our housing and our food and our water. Making sure that we have everybody safe is number 2. So you're looking at jobs, healthcare, fire, police, that kind of thing. And love and belonging is the next one. Social groups, family, workplace, church, networks, clubs, sports. Finding ways to engage people with each other so that they can connect with each other. And then number 4 is esteem. This is all about status. Very few things will move a person than an increase of status, like an increase of status. So if you can help somebody increase their status and their recognition and their self-worth, then you're going to be making a really big difference. And then the final one, self-actualization. This is all about purpose. Okay, this is about developing your full potential. And if we can help people in our communities do that, then we have people who can give back. And that's really, really important as well. So one of the things that I've noticed with this chart when I'm looking at rural and urban communities is that we have a lot of people that are working in urban centers. We have a lot of people that are working on initiatives in that very, very last 2 levels where you're looking at health and safety and you're looking at well-being, housing and food and all of that. And then you have people working at the very top, and they're not communicating with each other at all. And there's a disconnect. So in a lot of urban centers, you have people who are developing, that self-actualization piece, the arts, the culture, the building their communities and their reputations. And you also have people who are feeding people and housing them and doing that down at the bottom. But it's almost like they're completely separate. And that causes a lot of problems in the community because it fractures a community because then the people get really resentful at the bottom of the people that are working at the top. So just paying attention to maybe connecting those a little bit better in urban centers would make a difference. In rural communities, we tend to spend more time working in the bottom 2 levels. We don't spend a lot of time in the top as much as we need to because we know all the people that need the services in the bottom 2 levels, and we are working with them, and they're people that we know. And so we spend a lot of time there and all of our money and effort, and we believe that it has to happen first before we can do anything at the top. But here's the thing. We can't build our communities if we don't have people living and working at all of those levels at any given time. So if we don't spend time in rural communities building and working with the people who are working in that top level as well, then we're not creating more people who can give back and support and help build the community. And it's an attraction piece as well. So that's just one observation that I have about that. How many of you are familiar with Seth Godin? He's a marketer. I follow his writing a lot. He's brilliant. He talks about community and tribes and how to build them. And he's really, really a great writer if you want to follow somebody. He talks about thermometers and thermostats. And he uses those as an analogy for community building work. And he says with a thermometer, it's a tool to take the temperature and figure out what's wrong, what's broken in a community. And with a thermostat, you get a chance to change that so that you're in line with what's happening outside of that environment. So you actually get to manipulate the actual environment and make the change. So one tells you when something is broken, and the other one allows you to actually adjust it so that you're in sync with the rest of the world. And I think that's a really great way to look at community building. When we're trying to do that work in our communities, taking the temperature is really important, figuring out where the need is on that Maslow's hierarchy and where the actual initiatives are happening, and then use that thermostat to adjust it and make sure that we're in balance and make sure that you are actually meeting the needs of the people in your community. And that changes over time. There's no fixed number with that. Okay, so I have a poll everywhere too. Coincidentally, I had no idea that they were going to be using this. I had it worked into mine as well. And of course, it does not have the information at the top, does it? We'll go to the next one because it will at the top. Doesn't. Okay, guess what? We're going to skip by this one. Go by these. What I wanted to do, and if there's time at the end, I can go back, but what I really wanted to do is figure out where you're working in your community at each of those levels. And maybe we will be able to go back and try that, but you know, I'm not one for sticking with technology if it's not working at the moment. You just keep moving on. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about the rural-urban divide. I'm going to give you a little bit of information that I've learned. I've done a lot of research. I have a blog called Divide Ed. And I'm trying to spend time talking to people about what it means and why it's happening and try to figure it out. I don't have all the answers, but I have some observations, and that's what I want to share with you. So you've all heard of the city mouse and the country mouse. They visit each other's respective homes, and they both express a preference for their own home, and that's kind of the moral of the story. Well, this story actually is centuries old, and it was one of Aesop's fables. And that whole rural-urban ideal that was established back then is something that's been in existence for centuries. It's not new, and it's not something that we spend a lot of time really looking at in terms of it being something that's pretty consistent. So the rural ideal in this whole story is that rural is simple, it's peaceful, it's humble, it's cautious, it's safe, and it's slow. And that urban ideal is that it's sophisticated, it's exciting, it's ambitious, risky, and it's fast. So over the centuries, what we've done is we've taken these ideals that still exist today, and we've created narratives that have been shaped around these ideals. And sometimes the narratives are funny. We've had sitcoms like Green Gables and lots of, especially in the 70s, lots of rural sitcoms that were out entertaining people using that whole narrative. We have art, we have poetry, we have lots of really beautiful things that talk about those two different ideals. But then we also have narratives that are ugly, really ugly, and they're not new today. They're actually probably uglier 100 years ago if you go back and you look at what was said about one or the other. And so none of that's new. We're two sides of the same coin. There's also a centuries-old concept of relational elements like day and night, hot and cold, male and female, called yin and yang. So with yin and yang, opposite elements coexist in nature that complement each other. They're inseparable and they rely on one another to exist. And that's what rural and urban is. So we have a yin-yang relationship. We have a shared future, and we cannot escape one another no matter what we hear in the news. We can't escape one another. We are part of that same whole. And so when we set aside the narratives what we have to understand is that we're not enemies, we're opposites, and we need each other to exist. And I'm going to say that one again, like the previous speaker. We're not enemies, we're opposites, and we need each other to exist. So why now in 2020? Why is there a sense of urgency today? We all feel it. That's why I'm diving into this, and it's not an easy topic. It's not easy to have this conversation with anybody without people getting upset and having fights. So why is it's so important right now? If it's existed for centuries and we are part of that same whole, why now? Because I believe that we're having this hard disconnect between those two halves right now. It's not just ideological, it's a physical disconnect between rural and urban. And I think that's where we're starting to have some problems. So what we're doing is we're essentially going it alone. Rural development is happening in isolation from urban development. And we don't talk to each other. Now, this is an exception, because in this room, let's just do a show of hands since the poll didn't work. Put your hands up if you are working in a rural community. Put your hands up if you're in an urban center. It's amazing. Okay, that's what I think is magical about this entire summit, is that we have all of you working together. You have shared goals, and you're sitting at the same tables with each other, and you're in the same regions, and you're working at solving really, really big, important problems. And you're doing that as a rural and urban, and that doesn't happen very often. So why now? I think that there is really no relational consideration happening between rural and urban, and I think that that's causing this really big disconnect, other than in this room. So the pace of change today has been described as being like driving at high speeds in the fog. And we saw that earlier with Doug's presentation. He gave us all kinds of examples. But 68% of the world's population will be living in cities by 2050. And in the U.S., that's going to be 89%. By 2030, there will be 39 mega cities. Those are cities with a population of over 10 million people in them. So as our cities are growing larger, what we need to support those cities, and what is absolutely necessary to support the growing populations of people coming in, is more government. That's what cities need. They need more structure, and they need systems, and they need government. But as that's happening over here in rural communities, we're either staying the same or we're shrinking. And we don't need any more government. We need more development. And so that's one of the big disconnects that's happening, because fairness is not sameness. And we're treating the two very much the same. And we can't, because the needs are different. They're natural, and they're needs that are different. In the next 2 years, by 2022, 42% of core skills required to perform existing jobs are expected to change. 65% of children today will be working in jobs that don't yet exist. More than 1 billion jobs, almost 1/3 of all jobs worldwide, are likely to be transformed by technology in the next decade. Though that's happening, that's real. Where cities are automating right now, and they're working through that workforce struggle with automation, some rural communities are so far behind with internet that once we do actually get internet, we're going to have years of Netflix binging before we even get to workforce development. So this slide is actually blank, because I think that I just wanted to take a pause, and I wanted to say that I think that we're at a pivotal point in history. You know those moments in life where there's a before and after? There's in a community, there's a before the flood happened and an after the flood. That's how we talk about it. That's how we talk about the people and the experiences and all of that. I think we're at that point right now. I think there's going to be a before and after. And this is what we're a part of right now. This is our global cohort. This is our responsibility. And I think that it's really, really important that we face that with optimism and hope and faith, and that we work really, really hard to try and make this a transition that people are going to come out okay on the other side, because that's what you're leaders. This is a leadership summit. And that's what you're doing, and it's a really awesome responsibility. And so what does that look like? It's really a renegotiation. It's a new dialogue. It's a new way of navigating through our lives. And it's with all the understanding of the way we improve our situation. It's about quality of life for everybody. So intuitively, we have these two sides, rural and urban. They've kind of separated. Rural's doing its own thing. Urban's doing its own thing over here. And we know that we're two sides of the same whole, but we're ignoring that right now. And there's no balance. There's no connection. But intuitively, what's happening is urban centers realize that in order to develop and have whole, happy communities and people, they need to add that other element in it. So urban centers are doing what? They're adding rural elements to it. They're creating, bicycle-friendly communities, and they're greening, and they're creating balcony gardens, and they're doing all of they're adding the rural element in to make their communities whole. What are we doing in rural communities? How many people in this room have at least had a conversation about turning their rural community into a technology hub? Okay, me too. I actually did it. I was the executive director of a not-for-profit, and we were working on scaling technology companies in our rural community, and we secured all kinds of government funding, had a really great program, and it's working. What happens when those companies get to a certain scale? We work with them and develop, and they are local people, and they're doing great things. They end up leaving to go to urban centers because that's where the ecosystem is that's going to support them and help them grow further. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, because I think we have to support everybody where they are. And if they're in a rural community, we need to support them. But do I think that maybe we could have spent that money a little bit better? Yeah, I do now. But that's in hindsight. So I think that it's really a poor substitution for collaboration and cooperation when we're trying to work on building those other elements into our communities on their own. I think we could be working together. So it's like, I like to think of it as like lighting a fire at night is never going to give you daylight. And that's what we're doing. So in our urban communities, you're substituting the farms with balcony gardens. That's not going to help. We need to renegotiate, and we need to recognize that the wholeness of the world is in the strength of our opposites, and we need to find ways to work together. So who? This is a dreaded question that I get from people as a rural advocate, and if I'm doing a podcast or an interview or anything where I don't know what the questions are ahead of time, I always get asked to define rural. I hate it. I used to hate that question because I always felt defeated. I would answer it, and then I'd get all this, all the feedback that would counter everything that I said. And I think that defining rural the way that most people do is also contributing to that divide and causing that separation. I have to say, a year ago, my community became the latest CMA in Canada. A CMA is a census metropolitan area. Now, most people in my community that are on farms, that are in a town of 4,000 people, if you told someone in Sterling or Tyendinaga that they were part of one of the largest metropolitan areas in the country, they would laugh at you. They would think that you were crazy. But borders are redefined, and their communities are pushed together, and now all of a sudden, I'm a rural advocate in a census metropolitan area. And I find that's really hard. I mean, I talk about imposter syndrome when you're working with people, because I'm like Mowgli. I'm the kid that was raised in the woods by the local wildlife, and now I'm in a city, living in a city. But I don't think that it's any different here, because in my research, 6 in 10 U.S. adults who consider themselves rural actually live in areas that are classified as metropolitan. So it's not unique to Canada. And I really didn't feel bad when I found this. This is one of your government sites that actually has a button that says, "Am I rural?" You type in your address, and they'll tell you whether you're rural or not. So if anybody's confused about whether they're rural, then you can go and check that out, and you might be surprised. So obviously, changing definitions of rural are counterproductive to my work. Our experience gives us our unique perspective and allows us to define rural for ourselves in a way that can be fluid and leave room for growth. And so that's my answer from now on. I talk about story. I think story is more important than anything else, because a farmer is going to define rural differently from a retired banker or an artist or a remote worker. A 7-year-old is going to define it differently from a 17-year-old or a 51-year-old. Someone who's never lived anywhere else but in that rural community is going to define it differently from someone who's never lived anywhere but in a city and has moved to that rural community. None of the stories disqualify one another. They're all authentic, they're all real, and that's what's going to allow us to develop the empathy that we need to connect each other and to have really productive conversations, because it's not negative, it's always positive. Someone who's in a city is going to have a rural story. They don't have to have lived in the country. So you could have visited your aunt, or you could cottage or vacation, or you've had some camp experience. Everyone has a story, and they can connect on that level with stories. Story's pretty powerful if you use it that way. And the next way that we can look at developing opportunities is with pathways. So story is a way to introduce that much needed empathy and connection. But if we want to connect rural and urban to restore some of that balance that we need to remember that both sides are part of that same whole, and we need to actively create pathways back and forth. And it sounds counterintuitive, and I know that when we talk about loss of people in rural communities to urban centers, how can you possibly talk about creating stronger pathways? We need to create pathways back and forth. So we need to create stronger pathways back into rural as well, because I can tell you right now that there is a movement that is happening where millennials are looking to come back home, and they need help. They need our help to come back home. And there are whole Facebook groups and networks of millennials that are trying to get back to their rural communities. And they're looking for the jobs and the housing and the transportation and all of the things that they need to actually come back and live. So we need to work on developing those pathways back as well. And we need to also remember that we're trying to help everyone live their best lives. That's rural and urban. And wherever that is, it's not necessarily going to stay the same. So in the U.S., people on average move 11 times in their life. 11 times. And that's not all within the same community. That's in and out and back and forth. And it's when you need to move out and when you need to move back in. And if we can help people live their best lives at the time that they need to live them in whatever environment that is, then we're going to be doing a really great service. We're going to help people move up that hierarchy, that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we're going to create strong urban and rural communities. So the last thing I want to share with you is 2 opportunities that I think exist because of all of this, that's all of the technology changes and everything that's happening. How many of you know what a tide clock is? Okay. I'm in Ontario, Canada. I'm nowhere near tides. And I have a tide clock in my office. It reminds me of this magical place in Nova Scotia in the Bay of Fundy with the largest tides in the world, when the tide's coming in, when the tide's going out, and I can see that during the day, and it connects me to nature, even though I'm not there, and I get there maybe once a year, once every 2 years. It's a magical place for me, and it's all about that rhythm of nature. And so I really value that tide clock, even though I'm nowhere near an ocean. So as we urbanize and as technology fills our minutes and our hours, our natural rhythms are becoming out of sync. So we have different time zones. We have day and night where in urban centers there really is no difference. People are working straight through with a 24-hour clock now. Seasons aren't even being marked with anything sometimes other than sales. And we've got artificial reality that's replacing reality in some cases. And I think that there's a real toll that's being paid for that disconnection with nature, and that our natural human connection, our natural health and well-being is in jeopardy. There are studies, lots and lots of studies on happiness. There's a World Happiness Report that looks at the geography of well-being. And people are reportedly happier in small towns than they are in urban centers. And there are lots and lots of studies, and different countries are doing these studies, and it's pretty consistent with the way people are reporting. There's an entire new field of study called eco-psychology that is emerging right now, and that's exploring the relationship between personal health, well-being, and nature. And there's a mountain of evidence that says that your connection with nature, I'm sure that you've heard the studies that say that you are going to be healthier if you spend 20 minutes a day outside. And doctors are actually writing nature prescriptions for people now and saying, go and spend time out in your natural environment and you will get better, you will heal. So when we look at that, we can also look at the economic impact of nature, and we know that nature underpins all economic activity. The World Economic Forum put out an article that I thought was really interesting, and it said, how much is nature worth? $125 trillion. So let's break it down a little bit. Where are the opportunities for us in rural communities to connect with urban centers? The global wellness industry is a $4.2 trillion industry, and it's growing twice as fast as the global economy right now. When we look at different aspects of the wellness industry, we can look at wellness, workplace wellness. It's currently a $42 billion industry, and it's really growing quickly because we have so many people that are working in technology, working behind screens, and they are getting really, really stressed out. And being able to connect them into some kind of a wellness service is going to become more and more important for large employers. So employers are looking for opportunities to build workplace wellness programs. And there's a lot of money there, and there's no reason why you can't connect with large companies as rural communities and help them build their wellness programs. I mean, it's just a really great opportunity. Wellness tourism is currently a $639 billion industry. It's more than double the growth rate of tourism overall. That's not going to change. That's going to get bigger. So wellness tourism is another opportunity. Wellness, we heard earlier, Doug was talking about wellness real estate. Wellness real estate, building communities, wellness communities is also a huge real estate market. It's valued at $134 billion. So if you want to look at economic opportunity, there's a huge opportunity to start exploring ways in your community that you can connect with urban centers, solve some of those big problems that they're having, and also build economic development in rural communities. So if progress is the legacy of urban, wellness could be the legacy of rural. I think that there's so many opportunities. Rural communities can become the centers of human wellness in all of its forms. We could look at healing and support and recovery with addictions, loss, stress, anxiety, trauma. You can look at spiritual and artistic services and retreats, proactive health services with, adventure tourism and nature and food and yoga. There's so many different ways that you can look at developing these industries. There are real opportunities to use our natural capital to benefit rural communities and solve big urban challenges. So this is what I believe. I believe that cities investing in the preservation, curation, and development of natural spaces for wellness by strategically partnering with rural communities may be one of the smartest value-driven disruptions that we will see in the next decade. And we're just waiting to see who is going to actually jump into this area and start to develop it. And this is the second one. This is where I'm playing. This is where Rural on Purpose kind of started. For 2 years, we've been working in the remote work and freelance area, helping rural communities build ecosystems. Because within a decade, freelancers are projected to make up the majority of the workforce. Freelancers. And that's a huge opportunity for rural. A couple of stats. 73% of millennials are now going straight into freelancing. Okay. Told you there were a couple of generational jabs here. 59% of companies are now using a remote workforce in some capacity. And this is the big one. 7 in 10 freelancers would consider moving out of the city. So if you're looking at bringing young families into your community, this is a really, really big opportunity for you to build ecosystems to support them. Okay, and I got the 5-minute mark, so I'm almost done here. We build ecosystems to support rural communities to engage with remote workers and freelancers. And one of the things that you need some kind of a co-working space so people can get out of their homes and they can network and work together. And we know that you can't necessarily take a carbon copy of an urban center and build it in rural communities. And so we've done something different, and we've built our own ecosystem of support with a 30-day challenge where we can turn a community that doesn't know what co-working is, doesn't know that they even have freelancers, into a very knowledgeable community in 30 days that they know how to talk about it. They know who's in their community that is working remotely from their homes, and we can create co-working spaces there. So we ran this challenge. The last one we ran, we had 6 communities across Canada participating in the 30-day challenge, and we created 87 co-working spaces in 30 days. And they were all sustainable, and you're not investing any extra money, and it's a whole other presentation that I can talk about, but this is just another area that I think is really, really wide open, blue ocean for rural communities. So just to recap, we're opposites, rural and urban, but we're connected. The ideologies are centuries old. What we have in common is our pursuit of an improved life for everybody. I believe today we have a defining moment in time, not just to help balance out that yin-yang piece that we have, and to look at the disconnection and the isolation that's happening. And rural communities are acting alone, and urban communities are acting alone, and we need to find ways to connect the two. And I think we can do that with story, and we can do that with pathways back and forth. And two big opportunities that we can develop and look at developing is in wellness and in remote work. And so where do we go from here? I think it's time to take the temperature in your communities, take a look at where people are working in that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where your initiatives are, and start to try and balance that out a little bit. I think a really great thing would be for this group here, you're sitting at tables with rural and urban people. Think of some event that you have, a summit, a conference, something that you can invite someone from, if it's a rural summit, invite someone from an urban center nearby to come and participate and present, and do the same thing in the reverse, and start having those conversations, because nobody else is doing that. I can guarantee it. I'm looking for them. You guys are the first. And so I'm just about done, so 2 slides. 100 years from now, every single living person today is going to be gone. I'm not trying to be morbid, but it's true. You are my global cohort. We are collectively the stewards of this time in history. We have what every other historical cohort has had: unimaginable opportunity and devastating challenges. And these are our people. This is our time, and this is our place in history. And Susan Scott is an author that I follow, and she says, our context determines how we experience the content of our lives. So I have a picture here of a brick wall, and she says that a bricklayer lays bricks for a living, but knowing what you're building is going to change the way that you do your work and the way you feel about it. So are you building a wall, or are you building a cathedral? And I think that we're building cathedrals. And I think together we can raise the expectations, we can engage the hopes and dreams of our communities, and we can help them see further than they could before. And I think that that's our goal, and I think that's our purpose. And I really thank you so much for taking the time and sharing that vision with me. And I have, if you take a picture of the camera on there, if you take a picture of this website, I have just a landing page I created just for this group that has some downloads of the infographics that I have if you're interested in them. The manifesto, please share it around, make it yours. If you're interested in it at all, use it whatever way you want. And I also do a talk on rural youth engagement, which is something I'm very passionate about. And I have a 10 tips document on that page as well that you can download. So thank you very much for your time and for the work you do.